It's a guy with a rangefinder walking around that everybody noticed and then couldn't find. You know, he scaled to the top of a roof within 150 yards line of sight to the presidential Republican former presidential candidate by climbing a drain pipe. And then you said some equipment. He was being pointed out by rally goers everywhere they could, and nobody could figure it out. There's maybe supposed to be local law enforcement in the building, either upstairs or downstairs. And all of this is going on. And I was talking to a colleague of mine yesterday on the floor, and it's like, I hate the conspiracy theories that come out, but this is not the FBI's purview. This is the Secret Service's purview. This is so comically like inept to the average North Dakota citizen. Is just, they look at this and they're like, how could this possibly happen? And so when by you giving us information in a really meaningful way, even though we know the investigation's ongoing and things can change, that at least helps us to deal with that and figure out where we're at. And so, I mean, and you're doing all this. This guy had no combat training, no counter surveillance training that you're aware of, right?
I'm sorry, I couldn't quite hear that.
He had no combat training.
Oh, no, not, I don't think any, certainly no what we would call, what you and I would call combat training. Obviously, he was a fairly active recreational shooter, so he did plenty of shooting. A
lot of guys in Western North Dakota, right? I mean, all of those different things. And somehow we came within under an inch of a presidential candidate being shot and killed within 100 days out from an election. And when you look at it, so I just want to be really clear, because there is a lot of this. There is no evidence of another shooter, right?
I mean, another shooter.
Yeah.
I mean, there's the counter sniper who took out the shooter.
Well,
but right. But you're talking about like another.
Anybody else. And you're looking at his online and seeing all that, but there's no evidence he had any other accomplices on scene that day, correct?
Correct. Not that we've seen yet, certainly.
Gentleman yields back. Director, just to be clear, the photo and the message on the online gaming account, I think your testimony was to Mr. Klein that was somebody else posing as the shooter. Is that right?
Correct. Somebody after July 13th created this profile, pretending to be the shooter, and sent us down a rabbit trail, which we've now tied off.
That's important information.
We're all aware of it in law enforcement. So I think we need individual accountability here, and people need to be held responsible, in fact, lose their jobs, if necessary, to send a message that this massive intelligence and surveillance failure, as well as the enforcement failure, cries out for accountability.
I think this is a moment where, in the most stark way possible, all of us as Americans can see how out of control political violence is in this country. And it's an opportunity for everybody to come together and to try to show that this is not the kind of thing we're going to tolerate in this country. The FBI's role is to focus on violence and threats of violence. But there is a role for others in the public square to address how people communicate in this country. And every day in our jobs, we see in social media, in terms of threats that we get, thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of tips reported to us. And the language that's out there is just mind-bogglingly hateful and violent sounding.
Let me just ask, in the short time I have left, what is the nature of the Iran threat?
I'm sorry, Senator, could you repeat the question?
What is the nature of the Iran threat, the threat to former President Trump that has been mentioned?
But we know that, let me be clear here, the terrorist regime of Iran have been targeting people, our country, for many, many years now. We've talked about that here before. I want to be clear about that. From the FBI standpoint, we know publicly they've targeted former President Trump. They've called for his assassination along with other current and former government officials. That's public information. It's well known to everyone.
A specific or imminent threat on July 13th?
We have no information that there are any co-conspirators or that foreign or domestic, including Iran, related to this. But we're not, I want to be clear, we have no evidence of that. We're not ruling anything out. We're looking into all possibilities and leaving our minds open to that.
Was that on the minds of the Secret Service on July 13th, that there might be some threat from Iran?
Sir, we, as Deputy Director Bay just said, we're aware of the public sentiment and statements of the government of Iran to do harm to Donald J. Trump, and we use a threat-based model.
You're not going to believe what Donald Trump just said as FBI Director Christopher Wray just got grilled in a hearing by Representative Matt Gaetz. During a hearing in front of the House Judiciary Committee, Matt Gaetz, he questioned Christopher Wray about what really happened during the Donald Trump Pennsylvania rally where the assassination attempt took place. Now, these officials are hailed by critics as professional liars. It's also why it's kind of hard to get a simple yes or no out of them. And it's also why the shifting of gears from Matt Gaetz caught Christopher Wray off guard, because he was throwing simple questions and then all of a sudden he kind of switched up to talking about President Joe Biden and his clear cognitive decline. Now, the intent here is very clear. He wants to know who else was responsible for keeping President Joe Biden in office, even though in reality, the president has been really struggling with his mental sharpness. Now, a few names come to mind, but one that's more noticeable is the name of the VP. We're talking about Vice President Kamala Harris, and she was said to have been in numerous meetings with President Biden. As the presumptive nominee for the Democratic Party, it's kind of alarming that she would go out of her way to lie for the president. Now, the comments from Kamala Harris, they started around fall of last year. There's even one point where she criticized the Republicans for even questioning Joe Biden. According to her, age being raised as an issue was more of a last resort for the opposition as they had nothing else to run on, according to her. Well, it looks like the critics of the president and vice president have a lot more than just running on their hands. It's certain that Republicans will have a marathon regarding this issue, and it's starting with FBI Director Christopher Wray. Check this out.
Was the shooter on the FBI's radar in any way prior to the assassination attempt?
We did not have any information about the shooter. He was not in our holdings before the shooting.
No communication in any chat rooms, no CIs or confidential human sources have any interaction with?
No, we've run a thorough search for the subject through all of our holdings, and he was not in them anywhere.
Were there any FBI agents or informants present at the Trump rally in Butler?
Not to my knowledge.
And Mr. Jordan was talking to you about Iran. Were law enforcement resources diverted from the protection of President Trump to John Bolton as a consequence of concern that Mr. Bolton might have been the target of Iranian malign efforts?
That's really a Secret Service decision. I don't know the answer to that. That's really something they would know better. What I can tell you is that there are a number of individuals. You mentioned one who we've brought a case, a specific criminal case for the Iranians targeting for assassination. But how the
are you going to get that answer to us? Whether or not resources were diverted from Trump to Bolton? Is that just going to be part of your review?
I think that's going to be part of the reviews by the inspector general.
The inspector general for DHS, right?
Of DHS, right. and the outside panel.
And I think that's an important point, because the Inspector General for DHS has really fallen out of favor with the administration, because he's been pointing out all the problems on the border with Mayorkas and Biden, and we're always kind of worried that they're about to fire him, which would be a really bad idea now that this role that you've identified is so critical. Be a bad idea to fire the IG for DHS during the pendency of this, right, Mr. Director?
I don't think that would be a good idea.
I'm with you on that. So I want to zoom out a little bit. How often do you brief President Biden?
You mean on this specific case?
No, in your role as FBI director.
I mean, I don't know that I could give you a number.
Is it like weekly, monthly, daily?
It's not at a regular cadence. There have been times when there have been months at a time when I haven't, and then there have been times when several days apart I have. Okay. It's always with other people.
The vice president, is she typically there?
Often has been.
You saw how Christopher Wray suddenly paused, right? How he suddenly became hesitant to answer. Also, he's saying that it's okay for Donald Trump to have some of his security detail removed for the protection of other people, even though Christopher Wray said that this was a decision left for the Secret Service. The former director of the Secret Service, Kimberly Cheadle, denied ever doing this. Now, First Lady Jill Biden was said to have around 4 times more added to her Secret Service detail compared to Donald Trump on the day he was shot. Trump was in an open area with more than 20,000 attendees, while the First Lady, Jill Biden, was inside of a casino with 400 people. Now, as you guys can tell, there's a huge discrepancy here. In fact, Matt Gaetz had that gotcha moment when he steered the conversation toward President Joe Biden's mental acuity. This has led to former President Donald Trump saying that Christopher Wray has to resign. Wray is set to be the FBI director until 2027, but Donald Trump argues that he's been sweet-talking Congress every time he goes up. In that exchange, Christopher Wray pretty much stalled the questions about Biden's mental health, instead alluding to a notion that the president was completely fine during all of their briefings, even going so far as to say that he found nothing wrong, mentally or physically, with President Joe Biden. Donald Trump on his end says that anyone can see that Joe Biden is cognitively and physically challenged. And if Wray can't see that, then even he isn't fit to lead any government agency, let alone the FBI. You can argue that same thing could be asked of Vice President Kamala Harris, as she was said to have been included in these meetings. Now, speaking of the VP, she's calling out Donald Trump to a debate. Kamala Harris says that she's ready to debate and that the voters deserve to see the split screen that exists in this race on the debate stage.
Vice President Harris welcoming an on-stage showdown with former President Trump, accusing him of backpedaling from his previous commitment to a September debate.
I'm ready to debate Donald Trump. I think the voters deserve to see the split screen that exists in this race on a debate stage, and so I'm ready. Let's go.
Just this week, Mr. Trump said he'd be willing to do more than one debate with Ms. Harris, but appeared to balk at the current plan.
I agreed to a debate with Joe Biden, but I want to debate her, and she'll be no different because they have the same policies.
Their head-to-head is quickly heating up. New polling shows the vice president has narrowed Mr. Trump's advantage over President Biden. The race effectively a toss-up. On the economy, Harris today slamming the former president's proposals as tax breaks for billionaires.
Stephen Chung, the Trump campaign communications director, answered that these details cannot be finalized until after the Democratic Party has decided on their nominee. Chung said that it would be inappropriate to schedule things with Harris and then have another person face off against Donald Trump because they may change their minds about her. Trump on his end has said that he's open to debating against the vice president more than once. Alex Conant, a Republican consultant, said that this debate between the two could be decisive. Much like how Donald Trump forced the hand of the Democratic Party to remove President Joe Biden, the same might actually happen to Vice President Kamala Harris. She too may be removed. And since we mentioned his name, President Joe Biden has finally appeared before the public's eye. The president spoke from the Oval Office to address why he stepped down from the 2024 presidential race, and according to him, the decision was a matter of saving democracy and passing on the torch to a new generation. He adds that he reveres the office of the president, but that he loves the country more. He sees it as a way to unite the nation. His speech comes just in time for polls to show that he's reached a new low with his approval ratings. In a recent Gallup poll, it has showed that President Biden had an approval rating of only 36%. Not a great look for a president who's wanting to keep doing this for the next 4 years. It's also not great news for his predecessor, as they've both been seen as one person when it comes to policies. Now, I did a previous video where I talk about how a lot of women actually feel about Vice President Kamala Harris. Now, here's the bad news. They think she's not so bright. They use a term much more harsh than that, so make sure you guys check that one out for sure. Before I go, I just want to thank y'all for hitting the like button. Thank you for subscribing to the channel, and I'll see you on the next one.